guys, welcome back to my channel. So I'm here for my May wrap up. May so far has been my least successful reading month as far as quantity goes. I read 17 books. I know, that's still a ridiculous amount of books, but it's the lowest number that I've had thus far in 2019. But it was a superior quality book month. Like, I have, I think, 2 books that are 2 and 3 stars, and everything else is 4 and 5. It was a great reading month, let me tell you. So, because it is a slightly lower number, like honestly this is like 10 books less than I normally talk about, I'm going to be very ambitious and I'm going to attempt to film all of this in one big wrap up versus splitting it into 2 parts because I don't have as much romance to talk about, and most of the romance that I read was like a series, so I can't really go in like serious detail about it. So I'm going to try and go in some order. I don't know the order I'm going in. I'm still gonna try and go from least liked to most liked as the video goes on, but I think, considering that my lowest rated book was one of the romance books in a series, I think I'm just gonna talk about the couple romance books that I read first, get those out of the way, then move into everything else, even though the ratings will be kind of messed up. Okay, you guys will understand what I'm talking about. Starting with my 1 2-star book. That book would be The Goal by Elle Kennedy. This is book 4 of the Off-Campus series. I blew through this entire series this month. Like, I just listened to them back to back to back. And I adored the first 3. I loved them. They were 4-star reads, which is a high romance rating. Just so you guys know, I kind of rate romance slightly differently than I do everything else. It's purely enjoyment level. Like, I generally rate on like emotional reaction to it versus like quality of writing. If it's gonna be a piece of crap book, I'm still gonna rate it low, but I don't factor in as many like very intense critique techniques as I do with other books. Does that make sense? So, okay. Anyway, The Goal was book 4 of the Off-Campus series, so I'm not really going to go into detail about it, but basically this has all of the things that I dislike in romance. It's got the one trope that I really like, which I'm not going to talk about because it's a big spoiler for kind of the series, but if you guys have read the series, you kind of know what that is. I just didn't like it. I didn't like the main character. He was like my least interested character. That was not proper English. He's a character that I cared the least about when I'm reading through these books. Basically, it follows college-age students and all of their individual romances, but we're basically following all of these guys that live in this house off campus. They're all on the hockey team at this Briar University, and we follow each of their individual romances. So we kind of know where the series is going, and honestly, our protagonist, our main dude, our main love interest in this was like my least favorite guy out of the bunch. So that kind of drew it down. I just felt like the characters were not well developed. I don't know what happened. I feel like the first 3 books in the series have 1 book to hold up for you. I don't own the other 3. I don't know if I'm gonna buy the other 3 to be honest, but I have this one. This is the first book. This is The Deal. I loved this one. I loved, what's his name? Garrett. I knew it was a G name. I loved Garrett. I loved Hannah. I loved their story. I think, let's see, The Deal, it was The Deal, The Mistake, The Score, and The Goal are the 4 books that I'm talking about. I think The Mistake and The Score are my 2 favorite ones. Yeah, I think I liked Dean. Dean was such a cocky bastard. He's the main guy from book 3. All of these books kind of have the like stereotypical, like overly jockey, obnoxious, kind of douchey type of main characters who fall for a girl that they don't expect to fall for, and their romance is just precious. Book 4 just was like, didn't care for it. Didn't really like either of the main characters, didn't like the direction that their relationship went. It was just weird. It felt completely different than the first 3. If you guys have read the series, let me know if you kind of felt the same way. I just did not care for it. So that, I guess, is where I'm going with the romance discussion here. So book 4 was my 2-star book. The rest of the series was 4-star books. So that's all I'm going to get into with those. If you like hockey romance, if you like college or like new adult romance with some real steamy, sexy scenes in it, I'm going to highly recommend this series, but I just didn't care for book 4. That's all. The one character that I really want to read about, I think actually is in the Briar U series, which is the spin-off series. So I think I'm still gonna pick those up because I'm still waiting to read Fitz's story because he's like my most intriguing character that I just want to know more about. He's like the tattooed guy, he's the gamer guy. Is that the same character? I might be combining two characters. I don't know, I've already been talking for 5 minutes. I need to move on. Okay, let's see. I'm just gonna breeze through romance. The next one that I want to talk about is Culty by Mariana Zapata. Like I said, I've been working my way through Mariana Zapata books and I am loving them so much. And I read Culty, and this is the slowest of slow burns. Like, okay, Mariana Zapata is the queen of the slow burn romance, and so far out of the ones that I've read, this is the slowest. It was so good. I gave this one 4 stars. This is more of a like forbidden, somewhat taboo relationship just because it's following a soccer player and her assistant coach, kind of, but he is basically this idol that she's had since she was a little kid. Like, he is just a star, world-renowned, famous soccer player, or football player, depending on where you are in the world. And she has idolized him since she was a kid, until he kind of turned into like a douchey dude and has since retired, and she kind of has like fallen off the bandwagon of being a fan of his, and then he ends up, coming on to coach her team, and it is their relationship, and I really loved their relationship. Like, he was so freaking annoying, which I know is not a selling point for a lot of romances, but he was just, like, he had such a stick up his ass for the entire book, but, like, she slowly, like, breaks him down, and I just liked their development, because I feel like it was a very healthy transition from, like, coach-player to like friendship levels. Like, you start to realize that he has some serious stuff going on and he's not really willing to open up to anybody, and she's just kind of forcing him to do it. So it actually comes into like a very healthy friendship for a majority of the book. I actually really liked that, and it isn't until, in true Mariana Zapata fashion, the very end of the book that we switch to romance, and oh man, it had built up to that point, let me tell you. She is so good at building the sexual tension in her books. I gave this one 4 stars. I highly enjoyed it. I still think From Lukov with Love is my favorite one by her so far, but I haven't read through all of them. But I did like this. This one is up there. Moving through romance, the next one that I want to talk about is Royally Screwed by Emma Chase. I've been wanting to read Emma Chase for a very long time. This is obviously a royalty romance. I adored this. I didn't think I would like this. Going into this, I hated it, to be completely honest. The first couple chapters of this, the guy in love interest, the prince dude, was like all over the place, and he was a little trashy, he was a little obnoxious, like too far over the douchebag line, in my opinion. But as the story progressed, I didn't expect to like fall in love with these characters as much as I did, and I didn't expect their relationship to actually progress as much as it did. I kind of knew where the story was going. Everybody knows where this type of story is going, but it was just really refreshing, and it was a very like healthy relationship, and like they both made mistakes. They both owned up to their mistakes. It was lovely. I gave it 4 stars. I am definitely going to move on with this series because I am so intrigued now. Okay, and the last like strictly romantic book that I read, everything else kind of has romance in it, but it's not like the main thing. But the last one that I want to talk about is The Bride Test by Helen Huang. I'm pretty sure like everybody was reading this in May because this is when it came out. I adored it. I 4-starred it. I don't think I loved it as much as The Kiss Quotient, but I still highly enjoyed it. The autism rep in this is just like great. The diversity representation in this is just great. Basically, in case you guys didn't know, this is kind of a story about a guy who's on kind of the autism spectrum, like he's high functioning. His mother basically takes it upon herself to realize that he is never going to get himself a woman in his life. She basically goes and finds essentially a mail order bride and brings her back for him, and he's just like, great, now this woman is living in my house. Cool. And they slowly start to develop feelings for each other, and it's precious and adorable. I gave it 4 stars. Okay, so moving into my non-romance books, which means I'm kind of moving back down the rating system. Does that make sense? Are you guys with me? I have my 2-star romantic book and then romance books. We're back to 3 stars. So my 1 3-star rated book for the month was Angel Fall by Susan E. This was my book club book that we read together in May. I will leave my book club link down below if you guys ever want to read along. We tend to read a lot of YA backlist titles, which unfortunately kind of opens the door to read things that might be dated or might not live up to this time's worth of writing. I don't necessarily think that this was actually dated. I gave this 3 stars just because it had a lot of things in it that I think could have improved, but this was a pleasant surprise. I went into this knowing pretty much nothing about it other than it was like kind of a fallen angel post-apocalyptic YA series. which does not bode well for my taste anymore. I'm not really into the fallen angel trope thing anymore at all. But this was so different than what I thought it was going to be. It was dark, it was really gory, like it was actually very, very graphic. It handled things in a very different manner. Like this book, in my mind, kind of would fall more in the adult realm, just following like a teenage protagonist, if that makes sense. Like there's some heavy concepts in this and there's some brutal stuff in this. So, I guess my only cons for this book, the only thing that I just really didn't sit well with me with this book was the fact that her mom was said to have schizophrenia, and it kind of wrote off all of her bizarre behavior, and it's being used kind of as a plot device. Like you can kind of tell that she might not actually have schizophrenia, and I don't really like that. It doesn't really sit well with me because it felt a little crass to kind of use that as a plot device in my mind. It was just not a very healthy representation of mental illness. That's the only con that I really have of this. Everything else was actually very refreshing. I loved Rafe and his interactions with our main character. I don't really ship them yet. I just like them as individual characters. Like, what's her name? Who is our main... Oh, Penryn. Right, the Penryn series. Penryn is our protagonist, and she is kick-ass. Like, and she does not need help from these fallen angels to kick ass in any way, which I loved. Like, I wish that I read this when I was younger, because this is the protagonist we needed in the Twilight days. So I gave it 3 stars. I'm going to continue on with the series because I'm impressed by, like, the level of vulgarity that this book had, which is rare for me. That's not really how I should rate books, but it kind of upped the rating in my mind. So, 3-star book. Was it amazing? No. Was I intrigued? Very much so. Everything else from here on up is 4 stars, and I'm covering a lot of different genres, so it's kind of hard to rank these from like least liked to most liked. So all of these are in the 4-star range, so they're all kind of equal. I'm just going to talk about them in like the order that I read them for the sake of trying to figure out a ranking. But the next book that I want to talk about is my first 4-star read, and that is Verity by Colleen Hoover. Oh man, this was a book and a half, let me tell you. Okay. If you guys have read Colleen Hoover, you kind of know her type of story. She can be considered problematic. She can have problematic relationships in her books. I still like her books. I acknowledge the fact that they might be problematic, and as long as you acknowledge that, just go into them and enjoy them for what they are. Lovely, fluffy romance, okay? This is not that. This is a very messed up psychological thriller that I did not know Colleen Hoover had in her. Like, every time a new twist would happen, I was just like, whoa! Where is this coming from? Because it got dark, like real dark. So how do I explain this? This basically follows a woman who is a writer. She's an author, and she ends up getting hired to kind of co-write, but ultimately write by herself the last couple books of this woman's series, because this woman was in a car accident and is not capable of finishing her series. The woman who was in the accident was a world-renowned, best-selling author. So this girl ends up kind of moving into the house of this woman and her husband and their family's house just to kind of like look at the notes and figure out how to continue the series, when she realizes that there's a lot of dark shit that's happening in this family. Like, their twin daughters died at separate events in the past, and this woman was in a car accident, and there's just a lot of things that are not really adding up. And as she is going through the notes of the stuff for this book, she uncovers a diary of this woman, the author that she is like now co-writing with, and kind of uncovers the truth of what's been going on in this family and how dark it is. And I was just like, whoa now. So I listened all the way through this in one sitting. It was a ride. Like, whew, man, if you guys are in for like a hell of a dark psychological thriller, this is like up there on my list now. It was so good. And the ending, I'm not gonna spoil it, but that ending though, am I right? If you've read this, talk to me about it. Okay, moving on. Okay, in the same vein as thrillers, I also read The Asylum Patient by Alex Michaelides. I also gave this 4 stars. Again, we're in the 4-star section of this video. This one was great. I loved how this one was told. It was so brilliant. In case you guys have been living under a rock and haven't heard of this, this is basically following the story of a woman who, out of nowhere, one night, shoots her husband like 7 times in the face and doesn't speak a word from then on. So she is basically kind of in a psychiatric ward, and it's following a a new psychologist, a new therapist who is taking on her project to try and get her to talk, to find out what happened. He just like can't understand why she won't talk and why she won't like claim her innocence or claim her guilt or whatever. So it's basically his story as her therapist and trying to get through to her to get her to finally start opening up, to find out what happens. But we are also following the therapist's backstory, and you start to uncover why he's so interested in this case specifically. My God, it was done so well. Like, it's a quick thriller. Like, it's not very long, but man, it was good. I highly enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. The next book I got to is actually a nonfiction book by one of like my favorite humans on earth, and that is Thinking in Pictures by Temple Grandin. I read her other book, Animals and Translations, last year, I want to say. Temple Grandin is basically a revolutionary woman in the agriculture field. She is high-functioning autistic, and she uses her autism to basically break through and show how animals think, if that makes sense. Basically, how she thinks is very similar to how animals think, and she's used that to develop a whole bunch of things that really help in the agriculture world. Essentially, she goes to a lot of slaughterhouses and works with a lot of like meat processing plants to make it a more humane and friendly experience, because she can go into a facility and point out all of the things that an animal would be scared of. And if you guys haven't heard of her, she's like this amazing person who just like, the way her brain works is fascinating to me. I believe there's like a whole docu-series about her out, and I've read tons of stuff by her. So Thinking in Pictures is basically her story about how she thinks. The first book I read was more on how she thinks, how it pertains to animals. This one is specifically how her form of autism basically works, and it's fascinating. If you guys are ever interested in like the autistic mind and an internal perspective of what it's like to be autistic, even though it's a case-to-case type of situation where everybody is different, this is just a very eye-opening experience to really understand what it's like being autistic and how you might be overstimulated by certain things, what things can help you, what things stim people. It was fascinating. I gave it 4 stars. I will probably always read things by Temple Grandin or always be fascinated by Temple Grandin, so if you guys haven't heard of her, go look her up. It's real interesting. So I gave this 4 stars. It was my first nonfiction book of the year, and I felt like I was due for one, so this was it. The next book I finally got around to is my next classic. I've been reading a lot of classics this year, and I read Anne of Green Gables. This is the adorable Bookishly UK cover version of it. I finally got to this. It's by L.M. Montgomery. I'm sure a lot of people have read this by now. I feel like the Anne of Green Gables series and the Little House on the Prairie series, for some reason in my mind, are like the same sort of childhood classics that a lot of people read growing up that I never did. It was so good. I did not expect to love this as much as I did. It was just so happy and like a perfect time of the year. I feel like this is a really good like spring summer type of story. So in case you guys didn't know the story of Anne of Green Gables, it's basically following Anne, who is an orphan who gets taken in by this family who doesn't really want her to begin with, but she kind of works their way into their hearts because she's just a chatterbox. Like, she never stops talking. She has all these amazing ideas of the world, and her perspective on everything is just super optimistic and super happy, and she is just like blown away by emotion and by the world. And I just adored her. Like, she is such a precious little cinnamon roll, and I just loved her so much. So this basically follows Anne from when she was like adopted or brought into this family as like a little child orphan, and as she kind of grows up into like college level. So this is like that span of her lifetime, and I just adored it so much. It was so happy and heartwarming. The next book I got to was The Girl He Used to Know by Tracy Jarvis. I want to say Jarvis because of Endgame, but Garvis? I don't know. But I didn't know that I needed this book in my life. This book was so good. For some reason, I don't know why both of these books became available to me at the same time, but I listened to Temple Grandin's book and then I listened to this one, and for some reason the universe is telling me that I needed to be educated on autism for some reason this month. But this book was phenomenal. This follows a girl who is on the autism spectrum. It's never really addressed until very late in the book because she's extremely high functioning, but she acknowledges that she has basically like social quirks in herself that she knows is different. And it follows her relationship with kind of her ex-fling as they reunite later in life. Like, it kind of follows their story when they were in college and getting to know each other and starting to date then. Things happen, they broke up, and then they get reunited 10 years later. This also takes place in the 90s and the early 2000s. And this also does have trigger warnings for 9/11. That does occur during this book. But but it was handled beautifully because it showed kind of how hard that situation was, not only for people directly involved with anybody who was involved in 9/11, but how an autistic person would react to a situation like that. It was so well done. It was beautifully done. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is one that I finally got around to. I technically cheated because I finished this on like June 2nd, but I'm still going to include it because a majority of this book, because this book is large, was read in May, and that is Outlander. I finally read Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. I know, I was long overdue to read this, but these books are large, this series is long, and it was intimidating, even though I knew that I was going to love this. But one, historical fiction is kind of one of my, it's not in my comfort zone, I guess I should say. I don't gravitate towards historical fiction. Even though I tend to love what I do read of it, it's just harder for me to get into. But obviously this takes place in Scotland, and I'm a big fan of Scotland, Ireland, Wales, that whole area, that whole culture. Big fan of it. Do I need to give you guys a synopsis? Probably not. Girl touches stone, goes back to like the 1700s, ends up falling in love with a great Scotsman named Jamie Fraser, who I am on board with. Like, I hopped on the Jamie Fraser ship and I am sailing into the sunset with them. Oh my god. So I gave this 4 stars. There were a couple things that didn't sit super well with me with it, and also it was long. Like, I know you're just completely immersed in this world and you don't really care what you're reading once you reach a certain point with this story. Like, you just want to follow whatever they end up doing, which is what this book kind of does. So I feel like there were certain parts that were just really, really long. And the only other thing that kind of didn't sit well was that the villain kind of villainized queer rep in it. Like, I just didn't like that, like, they kind of villainized gay sex in it, even though I know it was kind of pertinent to the time period and things like that. It just kind of didn't sit super well with me. That aside, though, this was a phenomenal story. Like, I don't need to sing this book's praises to you guys. You guys already know. It's Outlander. Come on. I started watching the show, so I'll be talking about that in the future. So far, so good. The next book I want to talk about took me completely by surprise, and I feel like this is a very polarizing book. I think some people will love it, and other people will just not get the appeal at all. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. We are in the 5-star section of this video. And that book is Miraculum by Steph Post. This book is everything that I look for in a book. To just sum up my taste, this is it. If you guys ever watched the show Carnival on HBO. It got 2 seasons and it got canceled, and I'm still bitter about it. It happened like 10 years ago and I'm still heartbroken that show got canceled. But this book is essentially the book form of that show. In case you guys wanted like some sort of closure on that show, this is it. It's not actually related to the show in any way, but it's a very similar vibe. It's basically following kind of a traveling circus in 1922 in the Deep South, like in the Dust Bowl era, and it was just, it was so good, and it got really dark, like the show does. The show kind of touches a little bit on religion and a little bit on some dark witchcraft type things. I don't want to say witchcraft. I want to say more like demon-y, satanic type of things. That's not a selling point. I should not say the word satanic as a selling point. It got really dark though. Okay? Gonna go with that. And it got a little supernaturally. There we go. That's a better selling point, Chelsea. I love this. I love this so much. So this basically follows a girl who has worked with this traveling freak show, carnival, circus type of thing her whole life. And this guy basically shows up one day when their geek mysteriously dies. A geek is the person who basically bites the heads off of like bats. He's like the Ozzy Osbourne of the carnival era. I don't know why that's a thing that is present in freak shows, but I guess it considers you a freak. I don't know. But basically the geek of the show randomly killed himself, and this guy shows up to take his place at like the perfect time, and it follows her kind of relationship of her like figuring out where this guy came from, because he seems too good to be true. He seems like there's some other things going on, like ulterior motives that this guy might have with the carnival, because some mysterious things start to happen, like people start dying, dark things start happening that are unexplained, and this guy happens to show up at the same time. So it follows her relationship with this guy and uncovering what he has to do with all of it. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I want to reread it already. I don't know why this book hit me so hard, but I feel like it just gave me all of the carnival feels that I was missing from that show. in a lovely little book package. So I loved it. Okay, and the last two books that I have to talk about, I don't really have much to say because one, I already have a review video on the one because it was a reread, and two, the other one I'm gonna make a review video for completely separately, so I'm not gonna talk about it too much. But basically, I reread The Poppy War, which you guys know was my favorite book of last year. I never stopped talking about this damn book, and that means I also read an arc of the Dragon Republic. I know, I'm jealous of me too. So obviously this is still a 5-star read, and I will leave my review linked down below. I love that book, okay? So I was very nervous about getting into the sequel, and I haven't even hauled this yet, but thank you to Lindy for sending this my way because this is like my most prized arc of the year, and I was desperate for it. So this is also a 5-star book. This was amazing. I don't think I loved it as much as the first one, strictly because the first one just took me by surprise with how much I loved it. So going into this, I kind of knew that I was gonna love it. So it didn't have that like, oh my god factor to it. But basically, this picks up right where The Poppy War leaves off, so I'm not gonna get into spoilers, but it basically follows Rin as she is processing everything that happens and trying to kind of figure out where her place is in this world that she has wreaked havoc in. So I adored it. I can't really say much more about that. I am gonna do, I think, a spoiler-free review of it just because I need to talk about this book without spoiling you guys because it doesn't come out until August, but I have thoughts on it now. So I think I'm gonna upload a review of it soon. A lot of this book is military warfare and like political strategy and things like that, which is not what I like in books, especially in fantasy. As soon as it starts to get really political or very wartime strategy planning, I start to lose interest, my eyes start to glaze over. A majority of this book is that, but for some reason it did not have the same eye glazing effect on me, and I want to say the last 50 pages of this book fucked me up. Like, so much shit hit the fan in the last, like, chunk of this book that I was just like, oh my god, and now I'm in the horrible waiting game again for book 3. Am I right? Like, why do I do this to myself? I read arcs of books, which means I'm not even reading it on publication date, so that means I have even longer to wait for the next one. Why do I do that? I don't know. But those are all of the books that I read in May. I believe that was all 17 books. Did I talk about 17 books? I think I did. My throat feels like I did, so I'm gonna go. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in my next video.